gente, aqui é a Natália do Maternamos. Eu tô aqui para compartilhar com vocês uma entrevista incrível que eu fiz com a Gill Rapley. Gente, a Gill, ela é inglesa, ela é autora do livro Baby-Led Weaning, que simplesmente é a bíblia do BLW, é uma grande referência para todo mundo que fala sobre o método hoje. A Gill vai contar um pouquinho como que surgiu o BLW na vida dela e de onde veio essa ideia de escrever isso tudo num livro. Ela também contou sobre a vivência pessoal dela, com os filhos, como é que foi. Ela explicou bastante a questão do engasgo, comentou a resistência dos médicos ao método e ela também deixou um recado especial para nós, mães brasileiras. Infelizmente o livro dela ainda não foi traduzido para o português. Já está em 16 idiomas, mas não está em português ainda. Então, eu tenho certeza que vocês vão amar essa entrevista, aproveitem, vocês vão ver que ela é uma pessoa, assim, muito legal, muito simples, muito gente que nem a gente. Então é isso, gente, espero que vocês gostem, tenho certeza que vocês vão. Até!
Gill, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm sure there are lots of mothers here in Brazil that are eager to know you better and to hear your ideas. We don't have access to your book here yet, and we are waiting for it anxiously. So I would love you to tell us a bit about how baby-led weaning began in your life. I saw in your book that you had a master's degree on it, and you work as a health visitor for many years, I think more than 20 years, and you have 3 children. So tell me how baby-led weaning began in your life, in which areas of your life it began first. Was it in your job, in your personal life, with your children, in your studies?
Mostly it was in my job that it began, and health visitors visit families in their own homes, and we see them in clinics, and we give them information about feeding their babies and sleep and lots of other things. And I met so many families who were finding introducing solids hard. The babies, usually when they got to about, it was easy in the beginning, it was okay usually. Some were struggling, usually introducing solids around 4 months. So some found it difficult then. It was the spoon, and he didn't want to eat certain foods, and it was all getting very difficult. And I found that letting the baby feed himself was the answer. It seemed that the babies were not rejecting the food, they were rejecting what was happening to them. And so, but this was in the 1980s, and I saw something similar with my own children. But because in those days we thought babies needed other food from 4 months, we couldn't really do anything with that, except I would suggest to parents that as soon as their baby wanted to feed himself, they should let him do it. And hey, yes, around 6 months is when that happens. And then the age changed, and now we are in a situation where solid foods are not recommended before 6 months. And it all just came together then, and I could say, well, let's start this way. Let's not start with the purees. Let's not wait for there to be a problem before we let babies feed themselves. Let's let them feed themselves from the beginning. And it feels as though babies have always known that this is the way to do it, and it's taken us so long to catch up. I think it's important I make it clear that I didn't invent baby-led weaning. I just described it and gave it a name. But babies have always known it. And I feel a little bit like I expect you have the fairy story in Brazil to the little boy who says, the emperor has no clothes on. I feel like that little boy pointing out something which is so obvious, really, but we just couldn't see it.
But you used this method with your children as well, or no? Just it was too soon by the time.
Well, it was too soon, yeah. My children were born 1980, 1982, 1984. I did let them feed themselves as soon as they showed that they wanted to, but I also started offering foods at 4 months because that was the recommendation at that time. But I think I was quite relaxed about their I think I found what so many parents have found, especially parents with more than one child, and especially those with more than 2 children. I don't remember introducing solids with my daughter at all. She must have done it herself. I certainly didn't really bother with food at around 4 months, even though recommended. Recommendation was 4 to 6 months, so I was more relaxed about it. I let her show me when she was ready. And as far as I remember, she just did it herself. I don't remember spoon feeding her at all.
And Jill, you said you didn't invent the method, it already existed, so people did it, but you say in your book that they didn't talk about it. So why is okay to talk about it now? I think your book has had this influence of making people discuss it. What changed comparing then and now? What allowed people to talk about it?
I think it was difficult to talk about it then because we didn't have a name for it. So people didn't know what they were talking about. They either did the usual way or they did something else, but there was no way of describing what they were doing. Plus, of course, the recommendation was to start solid foods before 6 months. And before 6 months, it isn't really possible for babies to feed themselves. So nobody could really start that way. And I think as well the internet has meant that people are more informed and they share ideas more, and so they bring into the public domain and they want to discuss things, whereas before, mothers who didn't follow the conventional method were a bit isolated. They were perhaps made to feel they weren't doing the right thing. They didn't dare to tell their health professionals what they were doing, and so they just kept quiet about it.
And how was your idea to write this book? When did you decide to write? Why? Can you tell about this process of deciding to write it?
Okay, it's the book really came a little bit late in the proceedings from the UK's point of view. Baby-led weaning was already becoming popular within the UK and beginning to spread through the internet well before the book came about. And I had been thinking I might write a book, but then I began to see that some of the discussions about baby-led weaning some people were describing things which were not what I thought was meant. And some of the things I saw in people's videos and photographs on the web were possibly even dangerous. So they would, for example, be introducing solids at 4 months, but giving a food whole, leaning back as air, it not be safe. And perhaps they were holding food to the baby's mouth. They thought, oh, he can't do it himself yet, so I must help him. When actually the fact he couldn't pick it up was a demonstration that he wasn't ready. Okay. So I felt it was important to document what baby-led weaning really was, partly to help people to do it safely and understand it, but also for my own protection because my name was already associated with it and I didn't want to be possibly responsible or thought to be responsible for a baby coming to some harm. So, it was very fortunate that I met Tracy Merkitt because I don't think I could have written the book by myself. I wasn't getting around to it. She contacted me like you have. She was a journalist and she said, I want to write an article about baby-led weaning for a magazine. So we did an interview and she asked me, are you going to write a book? And I said, well, I'd really like to. Would you like to write a book with me, Tracy? And she said, oh, maybe, yes. And so then we agreed to meet, and the rest is history. We became very good friends and good colleagues, and we write well together because we complement each other's style. So we come up with a better book than I would have done on my own.
So I am going to ask you something that was in my mind when I searched for you on the web. Do you intend to be more, to communicate more with people by online? Do you plan to have a page on Facebook or a more interactive website? How do you want to do that, to connect more, or the book is enough and you don't plan to do more communication about it?
I'm a bit nervous of doing too much on the web because I know I could spend 24 hours every day on that. It's quite possible. And I am a part-time teacher. I have writing still to do, and I do give a lot of conference presentations. There are two things that happen when I communicate over the internet. I already get a lot of emails, and I always answer them personally. I'm very happy to do that and to keep doing that. But some people are looking for personal advice for their own particular child. Health advice, I can't provide that. But also, I don't want to answer every query about baby-led weaning because I'm not necessarily the expert. Remember, I didn't invent it. I gave it a name. Yes, I've studied it a lot, but the real experts are the people who are doing it. And I would much prefer that mothers learnt from each other and shared their ideas. And sometimes I look at sites and I pick up ideas myself, but I don't want to be seen as the expert or the owner of, I don't want to be precious about it. It's not something that belongs to me, it belongs to people. I also don't, this sounds a little bit selfish, but I don't want to spend hours and hours answering that aren't in my book. I would prefer if people bought the book, really.
And you mentioned your book was already translated to 16 languages, am I right? And I hope it will be translated to Portuguese as well. But I want to know, how is it going in the world? Is there more and more mothers interested about it? How is it going? I would like to have this feeling of this with you.
I can't really be sure. I don't know. Obviously, people who are doing it tend to contact me, so I think everybody must know about it, but not everybody does. But just the fact that I get more and more contact from people from different countries tells me it's spreading. And recently I've had a lot of emails from, well, a few emails from people from Brazil. So I know there's a big interest there, and that's why I've written to my publishers recently saying, please, can they work hard to find a Portuguese publisher, because it would be so good. But the first country where baby-led weaning really became popular was the Netherlands, and actually the book is still not available in Dutch. So I think because they speak very good English, most people there, and they read English, so maybe that's why. But most places it comes first by word of mouth, by parents, and then the book follows. I think that's the way it's gone in most places.
And is there more studying to be done about this subject? I ask that because here in Brazil there are lots of doctors and pediatricians. People are afraid to do it and to advise it because I don't know, is there more study to be made? Do you intend to study it more? I don't know. How far can we go about this study-wise?
There is more interest in the research community about it, and that's one of the reasons I'm quite glad that the internet is so powerful, and parents sharing ideas has actually forced researchers and professionals to take an interest in this. If I had gone the other route and tried to persuade professionals first, I think it would have taken a lot longer for the word to spread. And that's another reason I think it's important to remind everybody that people have been doing this forever, all over the world, but because it didn't have a name, nobody recognized it. So one researcher said to me, if it was dangerous, we would know by now. But there's no evidence. I have just finished my own PhD research, and I will be publishing some of that. I've been comparing spoon feeding with self-feeding to see how different it is for the baby. Was that there is no evidence to support spoon feeding. For babies who can feed themselves and pick up food and chew it, there's no evidence for spoons or for pureed foods. So when we talk about needing to have research and an evidence base before we can recommend baby-led weaning, actually we need to look at spoon feeding. I think we have to remember, just because baby-led weaning seems new, we have to remember it's not new, and it's what babies would naturally do. So many parents tell me, oh, my baby just took something from my plate. Yes, of course, that's exactly how it works. And so if anything needs to be justified, it should be spoon feeding. We have justify breastfeeding when the normal biological thing. In fact, it's formula feeding that needs the research and the justification. And I think we should look at baby-led weaning the same way. It's a bit like if we decided to not let babies walk, but push them everywhere in a push chair or a buggy, and then someone said, "Oh, look, they can walk," and then we said, "Oh, we better have some research before we let them do that." It's mad. Got it the wrong way round.
You said you are about to publish something.
Okay, yes. It's the results of my doctoral studies. I did a big piece of research for my PhD qualification, and so I had to make that into probably not a book, maybe a book, but more likely journal articles for the professional journals. So that pediatricians and health nurses and dietitians can read about what I discovered.
It is about the same subject as your book? It's about baby-led weaning?
It's partly, but it's compared. Is it spoon feeding with baby-led weaning? Well, I think it's important to explain that baby-led weaning is not just about babies feeding themselves. It's not just a method, it's a whole approach. So it's about babies sharing family meal times, being time to eat, being allowed outing, and making their own decisions, and the parents trusting their baby. So baby-led weaning is all of that. Just feeding or self-feeding are only a part of it. So yes, my PhD research was just comparing spoon feeding with feeding yourself with your hands. I was just looking at whether feeding yourself with your hands is a different experience from being with a spoon. Now, it seems obvious that it is, but nobody had really studied that before and written about it. And I just found that they were two completely different experiences for the baby. And so what I need to do now is document exactly the ways in which they're different and publish that information. So part of my thesis that I had to write for the doctoral studies, I wrote 100,000 words about the difference between spoon feeding and self-feeding. And I talked a bit about baby-led weaning, but the observations I made of babies were just about the type of feeding. I didn't look at the whole family eating together.
When is it going to be published?
Well, I don't know. I need to write various journal articles and submit it to a journal, and then they have to be reviewed and so on. So I expect it to be not just one piece of work, but several papers over the course of the next year, I hope. But some journals publish very quickly, and others take months and months to review articles.
Okay, and Jill, parents here in Brazil, they are terrified of choking. They think many people don't do this baby-led weaning because they are afraid of choking. I think it's the biggest fear they have here. I know you explain in your book that actually
Yes.
it is more likely for a baby to choke with puree when they are transitioning to solids than a baby that has been always fed like self-feeding. Can you explain this to my audience, please, about the risk of choking?
There is no evidence that babies need transitional foods. Babies can swallow liquids when they're born, and they then become able to chew. They don't really learn. Developmentally, they become able to chew, and then what happens when we chew food is we are pureeing it. We all eat pureed foods because we puree it in our mouths. If babies can puree it in their mouth, they don't need it depureed. And we think, I don't know why we are so confident that pureed feeding is safe. Babies can choke on purees perfectly well. It happens. And in fact, there is some research which hasn't been published yet, but I understand it may show that babies are no more likely to choke with feeding themselves than they are, with chewable foods than they are with pureed foods. And in fact, it may be the opposite way around. So a lot of our assumptions are based on what we have assumed that babies are at risk of choking because we've seen choking happen. One of the things I saw when I was a health visitor all those years ago was babies choking on second stage dinners, which were like purees with lumps in, because they were using, I didn't really understand why at the time, but I do now, they were using a sucking action and getting those lumps straight to the back of their throat, and it made them choke. You're much less likely to choke if you bite off a piece of whatever the food is and you have it in the front of your mouth and you can control it and you can chew it. We increase the risk of choking if we distract babies while they're eating, and yet for all these years, what have we done? We've played games, we've made babies laugh so that they open their mouth, and then we put the spoon in. There's no evidence that allowing babies to pace their own eating and be in control of what goes in their mouth increases the risk of choking. If anything, it possibly decreases it. You only have to, as an adult, ask somebody else to feed you to discover how much more difficult it is to control food in your mouth if you are not the person who put it there. So we need to get over this idea that babies are going to choke if we don't protect them. Actually, they can protect themselves. What makes feeding babies more risky is if we take control and don't give them time to match their breathing with their chewing, if we are hurrying them, if we're distracting them. And one of the golden rules of baby-led weaning is only the baby must put food in his mouth. If we put it in his mouth for him, he may not be ready to manage it. If he can't reach and grab it, he probably isn't ready to chew it either. This is how babies keep themselves safe. And what goes alongside this fear of choking is actually people noticing that when babies start baby-led weaning, often they don't actually eat much food at first. They lick it, they examine it, they may bite a bit off and chew it, but it often falls out of their mouth. This is babies demonstrating that they need to be familiar with food first in order to be safe. But it's when we hurry them and push things, and that's when they are used to taking sloppy foods off a spoon, that's when they're more likely to choke. So I think that, is that clear? There's absolutely no evidence that there is more risk of choking with baby-led weaning, and it might be the opposite. Okay. To remind people, especially people who haven't read the book, that it's really important the baby is sitting upright, is able to focus on the food, and is in control of what goes in his mouth, and then it will be safe.
Here, people are really strict about the diet. And yes, that causes that many times the diet the baby eats is different from the family. And in your book you say otherwise. You say that it's important for the baby to eat the same food as the family, right? So what is how parents should choose what they offer to the baby, and also be able to offer the same thing to the rest of the family?
And sometimes people tell me that it's better for baby to eat separately from the family in the evening because the family diet is not suitable, maybe because it has a lot of salt in it or sugar. And I say, so at what age then is it okay for that child to eat with the rest of the family? Is it okay when he's 1 year or 2 years or 3 years? You know, at some point he's going to family. All of the family's needs to be taken into consideration. And if parents cook for the whole family food that would be suitable for their baby, then they can eat it too. If they turn things around, rather than look at whether the baby can have what they're eating, cook in a way that the baby can share. Occasionally they might have something, a ready-made pizza or a frozen meal bought from a shop that's not really suitable for the baby. Okay, sometimes the baby might have to have something different, but mostly if they can learn to choose foods that the whole family can eat, it will be better. The reason that that's important is so that the baby feels included, but also because babies learn by watching what the adults do, and they learn which foods are safe and what foods are going to taste like and so on by watching other people eating them, and then they eat them themselves.
Okay.
If their food always, then when eventually they are introduced to the same food as the rest of the family, they may refuse it because they don't recognize it and they don't know what it is. So a lot of the food refusal we see happens at around the age where babies change from baby food to sharing food with the rest of the family. If they shared it from the beginning, we wouldn't have that problem. Most of the cautious way we have introduced foods to babies in the past is because at 4 months and 5 months, they're still very immature and their body isn't ready for a range of foods. But actually, by 6 months, most babies can manage all food groups. There's no particular need to take care with any foods just because it's the start. And I think it's very important. You use the word offer food to the baby. We must offer food, not give it. Babies have an astonishing ability to keep themselves safe. I heard a wonderful story recently of a boy who was at 15 years old. He was discovered to be allergic to nuts, to tree nuts, so hazelnuts, this sort of thing. And nobody knew, and his family didn't know. And it was only discovered because he ate a biscuit that his girlfriend made for him. And he was taken to hospital. He was very ill. He had a serious reaction. He said, I shouldn't have eaten that biscuit. It didn't smell right. And actually, ever since he was a very tiny boy, he had always sniffed his food to check the smell. He didn't know what he was sniffing for, and he couldn't have told anybody was that he just knew that some foods were not good and he mustn't eat them. And of course, luckily, his mother never forced him to eat foods that he didn't want to eat. So he was able to keep himself safe for 15 years with this serious allergy. So that, to me, is an amazing story, and I think we should really listen to what babies are trying to tell us. And of course, if they can learn about new foods one at a time, I don't mean one day and then wait 3 days and then another one, but having several foods on their plate that are separate, that they can pick up and try separately, then we're going to know, and they're going to know much earlier if they have a problem with a particular food. Whereas what tends to happen, at least here in the UK, is that babies get a whole meal all pureed together, you know, meat and vegetables and just all mixed together. So how can anybody tell what flavor is what and whether there's that the baby should avoid? We don't treat babies with respect when we just mix everything up and stick it in their mouth.
I would like you to send a message to my audience, to Brazilian mothers. What would you like to tell?
I would like to say, mind to the possibility that your baby is much more clever and strong and trustworthy than perhaps you have thought. You can trust him to know what he needs, and you can allow his ability and his level of development to tell you what he's ready for. You don't need to make those decisions based on a calendar, his age, whatever. If you put food in front of him and he can pick it up and get it to his mouth, then he's ready to start. One of the problems we have is with the words we use. Starting solid foods when you're doing baby-led weaning doesn't necessarily mean that the baby will start eating them straight away, but he will start exploring them and tasting them and getting to know them. And that's a very important part of him feeling confident. So I would suggest read about baby-led weaning when you can. I understand it's difficult, but I know there are some Facebook pages and websites for baby-led weaning. So find out what you can. Make sure the baby's sitting upright, is joining in with other people, is eating healthy food or offered healthy food, and then relax and let your baby show you what he can do or she can do, because babies are so clever and they know what they need.
Gill, thank you so much. I am honored to have you on my website talking to Brazilian mothers, and I hope to talk to you again, and I hope that you come to Brazil eventually to give a lecture, and I'll be there for sure. Okay?
That would be lovely, lovely. Yeah. So, and if anybody watching this has any influence with a publisher who can, help buy the rights to translate it, we need that to happen quickly.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jill.